Minse, Hajime Mashte. I'm Ido, Dani-san, colleague. We are going to talk today about one of our research dubbed the Facebook malware. Tag me if you can. The research was echoed globally and was a very big success in the security atmosphere. We are going to go in details on what we found about the Facebook vulnerability we found in the wild, how we worked with Facebook security to patch this vulnerability, and what was the initial evidence that led us into the research. So as I said, my name is Ido. I'm from a company called Kaspersky Lab, based in Russia, and part of a group called the GREAT, Global Research and Analysis Team. We are a global team with 45 members located all around the world, mainly focused on APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, banking trojans, critical infrastructure, etc. And we mainly research the most sophisticated malware out there. And as part of our private research, we also, each one of us has his own favorite. And mine is about responsible disclosure. And that was the main focus on this specific research. Both of us are based in Israel. I am responsible on the regional research in Israel from Kaspersky.
Hi, my name is Dani. I'm 22 years old. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Undot, which is an Israeli development company. We usually work on unordinary and complex projects from fields like fintech and data science. I'm an avid practitioner in hackathons, and I organize them as well. And that's it. Okay, so you probably asked how much echo did we get. So our articles mentioned more than 300 news outlets worldwide in more than 10 languages. We appeared on the Daily Telegraph, which has millions of viewers every day. We had some TV exposure as well in Israel. You can see Ido there on the left-hand side, and Brazil and Romania.
So you're probably wondering what was this evidence that got me and Danny starting on that research. So basically, I got a call from a friend who said something is going on over Facebook. And it's not the traditional phishing attack that we see every day. What he was talking about is a notification, a mention by a friend who led to a download link. And what was unique about it is that within Facebook's logic, you cannot mention a person or a friend to download a link. You can mention to a post, you can mention to an image, you can mention them to some sort of an external plugin which you embed on a third-party website, but what we saw was not something which is part of Facebook's logic. And before I got into investigating the malware, I took a hash of that sample and wanted to check within Kaspersky's internal systems what was the extent of the infection. And what I saw is basically that spike. What we see here is the number of victims. Do we have that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So over here, we can see number of victims. It reaches 5,000, but it's way more than 5,000. You can see here that it doesn't stop. It's about 10,000 and more. And over here, we can see a 24-hour window, which means that in a 24-hour window, more than 10,000 users were infected. Those are active machines, and this is where the attack starts. It wasn't there before yesterday. So that was something very, very interesting. Then I wanted to check what is the malware distribution. I wanted to see what the origin of the attack, who are the attackers. Maybe I can identify source and destination, because if those are like two ally countries, well, it will be something worth looking at. But if it will be two countries which are enemies, that it might be the origin of the attack. But over here we can see that the main attack was around Brazil. And going through those countries, we can see, if we skip Poland, we can see that Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, and Ecuador, we can see that the target was Latin America. And what we wanted to find out is what is the origin. So back to what I received from my friend. Here is what he sent me, the notification. And he sent me a link, so I opened my fake Facebook account, Ahmed, and what I saw there was the link to download the malware, and then we started investigating what's going on within that file.
Okay, so when we got the JSC file, we can see that it was about 5 kilobytes. And the extension was somewhat unfamiliar to us. We thought it was JavaScript first. Yeah, so it's not JavaScript. So JScript is a Microsoft dialect of ECMAScript. It's used usually as an active scripting engine, and it's basically plugged into OLE automation, so it's an executable. So looking over at the file, the first thing we noticed that there were domain names in there, so that made us suspect that there's some kind of HTML networking requests working in there. We saw the XML HTTP, which is the initiator of the XML requests. The ADO-DB stream is an ActiveX object used to manipulate and use basically the file system. WScript shell is also an object used to execute shell commands like changing the registry. You can see here that all the links are leading to JPEGs, and near that you can see that there is the same file with a different extension, which is used to download the files as JPEGs and then switch them over to the real extension. Another thing we noticed, app data. So malware can store stuff in app data, it usually does, but takes it to another place. In this instance, we saw that it actually stores all the files in app data. You can see this variable, it's mozcolor, which is a Mozilla folder in Turkish. So that made us suspicious that the threat actors might be Turkish speaking. Next thing we saw is the AutoIt, which is the automation tool for Windows. Manifest.json, which is suggests that this is a Chrome extension. Manifest.json basically contains all of the details about the extension with all the files that should be in it. Run batch basically initiates the whole sequence of the infection. And the last thing we saw is the ping.js. You can see it right here with Who's Among Us, which is basically sends a ping to a specific address to know that this stage has been activated in the user's computer. So who's really among us? Okay, so like Ido showed the map, the Kaspersky, we can see that the infection is mostly around Latin and South America. The users here, it's about 2,000 users, and this is only from one stage of the malware attack.
Sorry.
Okay, so we can see in the bigger picture that there were almost 100,000 compromised machines, and there was a big spike around May, and near July, which is when we published our research, there was a drastic decrease in infected machines, and we can still see some infected machines right now. They don't spread through Facebook anymore. That channel has been shut off for their spread.
So without getting too deeper into the malware, we first wanted to understand who we are facing. So we saw the Turkish variables, and that was the first indicator that a Turkish-speaking threat actor is probably behind that attack. And then we were looking for articles which had similarities in the attack process that we were looking at. So we found some sort of an article posted by Hot for Security by Bitdefender from January 2015 that within the article, you can see that they were speaking about threat actors they dubbed as B-Push Kilim, which are Turkish speakers individuals. And they had Turkish variables just like we had with comments in the files. They favor innovative techniques to spread malware through social networks. Well, that's a match. And they also use multi-layer obfuscation, mainly in JavaScript. Utilize multi-layer URL shorteners, third-party hosting providers, and multi-stage payloads, which we will meet in the next slides. And some very interesting thing that we also found out is both threat actors were obfuscating their infrastructure behind Cloudflare. So Danny was mentioning those JPEG files which switch their extension. And now we made it to a place where we want to dynamically investigate what the file is doing. So yeah, it's copying files to a Mozilla with one L in-app data. And those are the 12 files which are being downloaded. The first one, the Auto-It tool, was already discussed by Danny. This one is new, and we haven't talked about. That's a background JavaScript file, which is an extender to the Chrome extension. So there will be a Chrome extension. You can see it here highlighted in blue, as we expected. And to that extension, we have an extender, like another code which creates more data from the malware. This AKL AU3 script is one of the scripts which are being fed into the Auto-It file. So the Auto-It is some sort of a container that requires code in order to execute it, just like a compiler in some sort of way. And those are the scripts. We also can see that this file is 251 kilobytes, and the rest of them, there is one here, 233, and there are two down here, which are also the same size. That is because this one contains malicious encrypted code. However, the key to the script and the entire process is within the file as well. So we skipped that, stage of the attack because it was very straightforward. The zip file is probably stored for something around Firefox or maybe some extensions of the malware. It's an empty zip file. The ping.js Danny discussed about with the statistics, the batch file which executes, and there is a version here which basically contains a string 1.1.5. So we started the dynamic analysis, and once we launched our sandbox, previously there was a Chrome instance, and it was terminated. And instead, we got those two shortcuts coming from the Auto-It script. So when the batch file took an AU script, sent it to Auto-It, and then it started manipulating the registry, changing things within the operating system, and adding those shortcuts. All the changes were mainly around Chrome, adding the extension, etc. So over here, another instance is being automatically opened, and we can see two key factors at this point. One is the extension here. It's very small, so you might not notice, but it's like a tiny gray square with a random lowercase English letter within it with a random name. And the second thing, which is more interesting, is that there is a tab here of Facebook. However, the restore window is still open, and I haven't restored my tabs. So that means that the malware is pushing a tab opening the Facebook for the victim to be lured into logging into his Facebook account. Now we wanted to look at the extension, but once we got into the Chrome extension settings, it immediately redirects us to the extension store. That is a prevention that the attacker created in the background JavaScript I was referring to just a slide earlier, where he prevented the victim from disabling the extension. Because here you can enable and disable, and the attacker didn't want the victims to disable the extension. But you can simply open the JavaScript in your convenient editor and just comment out the code or remove it, and it will get you to this place. So now we hit the details button because you want to see what the extension is doing. So without further ado, we can see that the permissions the extension is taking is the read, change all your data. It reads and change all your browsing history. It can display notification, read data, and copy, and basically we can see it a man in the middle. We can see that it can control the entire traffic which is over your browser. So we know it's a man in the middle, but we want to understand which other protections are there. And if you open the background JavaScript, you can see this for loop iteration that takes from a Zara, Lim, whatever, array of security products domain names. And once we wanted to browse to one of the domain names, then we can see that it's blocked. For instance, this Kaspersky.com is blocked. And that's another protection from the attacker that wanted to prevent the user from disinfecting his machine. Now we go to another type of protection, and this one is not in the background JavaScript. This is where we started to get suspicious. Over here we can see, go back one, sorry. Over here we can see two factors again. One, there is no Turkish. This one, this message is in Spanish. That means that the Turkish individual, the threat actor, is using some sort of a tool, and the tool is intended to Spanish speakers. And the second thing was that something here was missing. The Facebook account we logged into is currently blocked. We cannot log in back to our account because it's infected because of the malware, and something is being hidden in the back. And what was hidden is a plugin. In this case, it's Kaspersky, but Facebook had collaborated with a lot of security vendors in order to prevent account infection. And the plugin which you can download and disinfect your Facebook, it will make sure that your identity is what you claim it to be. And it will download the plugin and will release your Facebook account. And that is what the threat actor wants to prevent.
OK, so right now we were about here. And there wasn't too many suspicious things until we got to the point where usually in Facebook, when you click on a link, you get a redirection protection from Facebook, which tells you that you're leaving the website. But here, as you can see, this is after it was blocked. But once you click on the mention link, you're prompted to download the file right away. And that was very suspicious for us and made us go and look deeper. So we opened up our web proxy to see the traffic that was going on after the malware was installed on our sandbox. And right away, after we opened Facebook, we can see that there was a file, GET request to get a file called data.js from a domain name that was pretty suspicious to us. Right now, it's corneliuspettis.com.
And then the phase of trying to understand what the missing piece was started. So after we went through this tiny area on the surface and we understood that something is going on in the background, and there is a vulnerability here. Something is not right. The logic could not happen without any exploit on the web platform. Then we started to investigate this data.js that was downloaded in the background and created this Spanish iframe. So we are looking here up here, and we can see some sort of a strings which pretty much like a signature of the file. This is an email over here, and that's called generated DO with 3, 4 random digits. And we had no clue. There was nothing online. There was nothing in the repository, something that was analyzed by other security vendors or something we could rely on. And then, you know, I got to a phase where I'm sitting at night. I'm looking at this encrypted code and this XOR function here and some sort of a split here. And I know that for the next weeks, in order to get where we want to be and crack this open and find the Facebook vulnerability, we will have to have a lot of night without sleep. And I'm scrolling down, and this is 1,500 lines of code. And I'm like, OK, this is not going to be something easy. It's going to get rough as we go with it. So we're scrolling down, and we can see that it keeps repeating itself. So over here, we can see the same XOR function without wasting your time on trying to understand what's going on here. But this B function in yellow, this B function in yellow is basically the same function we saw earlier, and it's the same routine. However, something else is going on here. The age was the result from the previous routine, and what happens here is that it created an array of strings and a new key, and then got into this for loop. And when it got into this for loop with a new key, that the key is probably OK, that's the counter, and the key is probably here in 27. In index 27, there is a key, and there is a payload as well. And what it will do is get into this var e and eval everything. And once it will eval, we will have a hard time following it because everything will be dynamic. So now we want to understand how we can debug this code. And the first thing we wanted to do is, well, we can debug it. We open the browser, inspect element, click on the VM, and inspect every line of the code, right? Easy. But no, the attacker had it another way, and they implemented some sort of a debugger routine where you cannot debug the code. To get a more visualized view of how it looks, then we got into our fake account, and we can see here the implementation of the debugger and how we cannot skip it in order to debug the code line by line. That means that we need to find some other way in order to get the readable code, because try to read the obfuscated code won't be an easy task in the short amount of time we have in order to release the research. The next thing we stumbled upon, which is another gatekeeper the attacker had for us, was some sort of a hashing routine. We were looking at it. It looks like a very complicated mathematical iteration. And once we started to calculate what it was doing, we got to a point where it's calculating hashes. And the hashes were code snippets. So we took chunks of the code from itself and hashed them, had signatures. And the signatures were mainly to understand if someone had implemented or had injected code within the JavaScript, changed it in a way, trying to analyze the code. And once we tried to analyze it, we injected this console.log. And for those of you who are not new to JavaScript, console will just print to the inspect element console within the browser. And that's a simple way of just printing code, printing results. And that's what we did, and it changed the entire iteration. The entire code signature was changed, and over here you can see that's readable code. You can see here length and the payload itself, function. It's very small, but I will read it for you. And over here it's gibberish. So that was another protection we had to bumped into.
Okay, so the big breakthrough came when we couldn't actually do anything with those hashes. We said, okay, we can spend a lot of time now trying to decrypt the process, or we can try and do it in another creative way. So as Ido was saying about the console log, the other interesting thing they did with the console log is they overrid the function, that even if you could inject it, the function basically does nothing. So it was pretty late at night, and we were playing with the developer console right here, and we thought to ourselves, okay, let's try to use some of their functions and just give them random parameters. And that actually worked. It initiated a crash in one of the functions, and the console actually sent us to the point where the crash happened. And as you can see, that crash happened inside a VM of a loaded code from the eval function, and all of the code was clear to us, and we can see everything that was going on in there. As we mentioned before, the who's among us, here's another point where it sends who's among us. There are multiple of them inside the code, basically to check how the code is working and if there's crashes or if parts of the code are not usable anymore because they were blocked. And you can see the graph is pretty much the same. There's a big peak in May, and then about near July, when we released the research, it stopped. So let's start debugging the code. Okay, so coming from a developer background, I used Google APIs a lot, so this was pretty familiar. In order to use any Google API, you need to get an authentication token for the user that is using it. So here we can see the two services he was using are the Google URL shortener and the Google Drive. So after the request is initiated, it was a simple GET request. On the background, it gets back an HTML page, and you can see there's a hidden input, which basically states the authentication token and the expiration. So from now on, this token will be used for any request to any Google API on behalf of the user. This is a sample request. This is a file upload, and as you can see in authorization, there is the Google token that we got. So instead of using his own CNC to store the infected files and the files to infect the other people, the malware basically used the infected users' Google Drive, or another variation, it used Dropbox as well, to store the files. So we can see this is a multi-file upload. We have our token that we got before, and the content is base64 encoded and is one of the files that we were infected with. And after the upload, we get back the ID, which is the ID of the file. And remember that ID, it will come up in a bit later slides.
So I don't know if Danny was mentioning, but the JSE file, the one that started the initial infection, was actually looking similar to what we are looking at right now. The only thing, so don't waste your time on trying to read what's inside. I'll get to a readable code just in 1 second. What we can see over at the top was the name of the Facebook user, which was infected. And the title, the use of the title, is because everything is going through Facebook. And the redirection is from Facebook. So if you redirect from Facebook and you look at the title and you see your friend's name at the title, so it seems like the file is coming from a good origin, right? So you start by seeing the Google Drive, and then you see the title of one of your friends, and you say, okay, yeah, that's a file I would execute. And this code appears to be looking like that. But before I get into this code, which is basically self-explanatory, but I will go into it, I just wanted to recap for a second just to make sure that everyone is following. So we started with the dropper, with the JSE dropper. We analyzed the dropper and what file it is. It wasn't a JavaScript, it was a JScript. Then the Chrome takeover, when we dynamically analyzed what's going on within our sandbox. And we found the malicious JavaScript, the missing piece. Then we understood that it takes Google permissions, which Dani just talked about, and it uploads something to our Google Drive storage. And now we are looking at what we are uploading to our Google Drive storage. We thought that only the JSE file will reside on our Google Drive. However, we were wrong because this file is entirely different. Over here, we can see the payload. It's been truncated just for convenience of the talk. And it's called a decode function, which is right here. That has a key over here and a for loop. And it pretty much reminds us of the big JavaScript with the deobfuscation. There is no XOR here, but it pretty much reminds how they work. The eval function here is what executes it. The A to B is basically base64 decode. And the encoded payload is being sent to this file. And over here, we can see the base64 decode. The split and the join are basically equivalent. And it's in reverse mode. So the reverse function basically reverses it back to a mode where you can read it. And it has a delimiter, a random delimiter B, which is being taken out. So it could, from a string, it will now be an array. And then the for loop to decode the string using the special key it received. After it's being decoded, that we can look now at the decoded code, and we can see that it uses two key features or key objects from our browser. One is the navigator, and the other one is screen. And the usage of those two objects is obviously to fingerprint our browser. The attacker wants to fingerprint our browser in order to have more information about the victim. If he knows where the victim is coming from, if he knows which browser it uses, if it's a mobile phone, if it's a Mac, or if it's a Windows machine, then he can understand where it was loaded. Then there is a request over here. We can see the XML HTTP request. There is a post request sent over here with decimal decoded domain name. That's from the command and control domain name with some sort of a file. And the question mark is what's splitting the domain request from some sort of a mathematical random number, which we will see in just a bit. And the interesting part here is this. That's an info parameter. Info equals info send. And within that info parameter is the data that's being sent to the command and control. So over here, we can see what is being sent. This is the info parameter we were just speaking about, and this is the payload, which is, again, base64. This is where the data is being sent. The push information.top, it's one of the domains from the attacker. Here is the file, the question mark, and the random math that we just inspected. And this is the signature or the fingerprint that is being sent to the attacker. We can see here, for instance, the agent from the HTTP request, user agent. Yep.
Okay, so like I told you before, there was the ID that is basically, we got it back from the upload of the file that Ido was just talking about. And everyone knows that if you want to infect people, there's no use of a file which is uploaded and is not publicly accessible. So what is going on here is another request to the Google API. This time it's to change the permissions of the file. And as you can see here in the highlighted spot, the role of the reader is now open to anyone. So this is the request. And in the response, we get a link to the file. So basically, this file now is open to anyone to read, but it's not open for modifications or deletions, so it's pretty much protected. So after we get the link of the file, which as you saw is a pretty big link, the malware uses two services to get short URLs. So the first one is a google.gl, which is a URL shortener from Google. It's pretty straightforward, sends the URL, uses the authentication token it used before, and in the response we get a short URL. And the other one is tinyURL, which requires no authentication at all. The split here is that the Google short URLs are used for publishing on Facebook and doing the redirect. And the tinyURL is a fail-safe, which it uses a bit later in sending out and spamming the users with the link and through Facebook messages. This is a snapshot of my Google Drive after it was infected. As you can see, this is the common.js file, and these two are HTML files, one for downloading common.js, and the other one is for downloading the file they just showed that collects your information. Okay, so similar to the Google token hijack, this is the Facebook token hijack. In order to use the Facebook services, he needs to get a token for it. The weird thing here that the app ID that he used is Instagram's app ID. But another thing we can see is that in the scopes, it requests the read mailbox, which Instagram does not request. So after the request, we get the response, and we get an access token, and again, the expiration. The expiration doesn't really matter if it has a fail-safe that if the request to Google or Facebook fails, it just renews the token.
So before we get to the interesting part where the Facebook vulnerability relies, we get into the fail-safe mechanism. And those are where the URL shorteners come into place, which matches to what the article we find that we mentioned earlier. And what we see here, just to get a little bit more focus, is the malware running automatically in the DOM. So everything here happens automatically. And what happens in this part is basically after the fingerprint of the browser, the attacker now knows which language is being used on the machine, and he can use localization in order to post a Facebook post with the user's language. So basically it can be Japanese, it can be Spanish, and in our case it was English on our sandbox. And within the code, before that request is being sent, this image is being embedded. And it contains profile images, one from the victim and the others are from his friends. And the fact that it does that, it's because it hijacked the Facebook token, and now it can integrate with the FQL, the Facebook query language, and it can request for the contact list and for graph, Facebook graph information, which contains also the contact profile images. And that's where it embeds this post in the victim's wall. The next one for the fail-safe, if the mention does not work, is a spam which is being sent to the entire messenger list. So the attacker gets the list of the entire contacts, and then it sends, we can see on the right side, it's the Facebook API message when being sent. And on the left side, we can see how the messenger box is being spammed with a lot of tiny URL requests to each one of our friends.
Okay, so up until now, we talked about the fail-safes, and we talked about stuff that actually worked without any vulnerability. And now we're getting to the part where how did he made a mention link that prompts a download without the Facebook protection. So the first part was to use the Facebook Comments plugin, which is a widely used plugin in personal websites and blogs and various media outlets that basically lets you have your own comment section in your website where people can comment with their Facebook profile. So the first thing was to use, this is the URL to open your own comment section. The API key that was actually used is the test API key from Facebook documentation. And here is the link that basically this is where it redirects you once you go to the comment section, and this was for every file there was a different link. So after it initiated a request and it got the token to post comments, it creates a comment using and tagging all the friends or as many friends as he can and posting it to the comments plugin. But the comments plugin will not show you a notification in Facebook if you didn't post there before. So what it did, it took the ID of the comment that I got from the comments plugin and posted a comment in Facebook on the regular website where the notifications show if someone tags you there, and injected the comment, the ID of the comment from the comments plugin. And that was where we found the vulnerability, because once you do that, the user does get a notification, which looks like a regular comment, and once he clicks on it, it prompts a download right away. Two last things that he did was to set the profile privacy to public. It had another request to Facebook. So basically the exposure will be as large as possible because everyone would see the user's posts and comments. And to set the text of the comment to null, so by basically deleting the comment and deleting all traces. So all in all, there were a couple of stages here. The first one, the user gets a message that he's mentioned. He clicks on the message. The file gets downloaded, and if he clicks on it, the Google Chrome browser is taken over, as well as the other browsers. And the script runs in the background once he goes into Facebook, and this whole loop just goes over and over, infecting as many people as possible.
Facebook or Google can detect these malicious activities because those kind of activities happen simultaneously. So I think this, for example, the clicking the same URL from the several users in Facebook could be detected in Google and Facebook also.
You're correct. First of all, since it was in the DOM, it was very hard to detect because it was the injection itself. It was something that could have been detected very quickly. However, it requires testing to make sure that that is the part which is being injected to, and that it can be injected again in some sort of another way. That was part of our check, that it is still not vulnerable. And once we worked with Facebook to understand that this was what the injection was about, and we made sure that there was nothing. Of course, both sides worked together, and that's their platform. So, you know, they had their internal things going on over there, and we had our side. On Google, on the other hand, Google uses the hosting in a way that you can host almost any type of file. They do have their sandbox checking for files, but there was no prevention for those type of files. Again, mentioning that you're using the DOM on behalf of the user. So hijacking the token was not something that Google can detect.
Was the malware looking for any like user information, or were you able to find out what the motivation was behind the malware?
Well, the malware, there were parts of it which is it gets data. It can basically update itself all the time. So the first stage that we thought that it was basically to spread it to as many computers as possible. And there was basically like a continuous integration in it, so it can download the new versions of itself all the time. So the opportunities it can do anything with it. And the thing that we forgot to say that there were a couple more platforms that we saw, and they contacted Ido as well, that it wasn't only Facebook.
Yeah, previous infections were around platforms such as Wix, Dropbox, Instagram. We can see that the attacker had fingerprinted or learned how the clients work, how the services work, and launch or keep launching attacks as we speak. So they keep learning how the client works, and how they can imitate or mimic the user's intervention and infect as much as possible. We did found some strings that contained some sort of, with the Spanish to the extensions.
We actually found some new variations of this malware with pretty complex things such as checking it integrated a Gmail inside. So when it wanted to upload a new file, let's say to Google Drive or Dropbox, if the user did not have a profile there, account, it would open an account and then go back to his Gmail and find the confirmation link, post a request to it, and then once he gets the confirmation that the account is activated, only then it starts uploading the files. So it's getting more complex every variation. They put more features inside it.
Yeah.